Sometimes love finds us in the most impossible places, when we least expect it and certainly when we least deserve it. Sometimes the heart chooses for us, ignoring every sensible thought our mind tries to whisper, every warning our past tries to scream. In 1882, in the rugged territory of New Mexico, just outside the growing settlement of Silver Creek, stood Jeremiah Bear McKinnon, all 6 feet and 10 inches of him. With shoulders broad enough to block out the sun, and hands scarred from years of working iron and wood, his dark hair hung past his collar, and his green eyes held the kind of pain that comes from losing everything that ever mattered. Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore sat in the dusty stagecoach, her teaching certificate clutched in her gloved hands, watching her entire future crumble as the driver explained that Silver Creek schoolhouse had burned down 3 weeks ago, and with it, her promised position and the boarding house room that was supposed to come with it. "I'll build you a school with my own hands if you'll have me," Bear had said, his deep voice barely above a whisper as he stood beside that broken-down coach, hat in his massive hands. "I'll give you a home, protection, and my name. All I ask is that you help me keep the land. That's all I got left of my family." But how could a desperate schoolteacher and a grieving giant possibly survive when 3 Apache sisters, each more beautiful and fierce than the last, had already laid claim to the same man, and their father, Chief Running Wolf, was riding in to settle the matter once and for all? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore first laid eyes on Bear McKinnon, she was covered in dust from the crown of her sensible brown hat to the hem of her practical gray traveling dress, and she was madder than a wet cat. "What do you mean there's no school?" she demanded of the stagecoach driver, who was already unhitching the horses with the eager movements of a man desperate to be anywhere else. "I have a contract. I have a signed letter from the town council." "Yes, ma'am, I'm sure you do," Old Pete wheezed, not meeting her eyes. "But that don't change the fact that the schoolhouse burned down 3 weeks back, and half the town council lit out for California the next day. Ain't no school, ain't no job, and ain't no room at the boarding house neither, seeing as how it burned too." Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She'd spent her last $23 on the stage fare from Kansas City. Her trunk contained everything she owned in the world: 3 dresses, 2 petticoats, her teaching books, and her mother's Bible. Behind her lay nothing but the grave of her parents and the charity of relatives who'd made it clear their patience had run thin. Ahead lay nothing. That's when she heard the voice, deep as thunder, rolling across the mountains. "Ma'am? You're the new teacher?" Sarah turned and had to crane her neck back to look up and up and up into the face of the largest man she'd ever seen. He stood at least 6 feet 10 inches, with shoulders that strained the seams of his worn flannel shirt and hands that could probably span her entire waist. His dark hair was longer than fashion dictated, touching his collar, and his green eyes held a gentleness that seemed at odds with his imposing size. "I was supposed to be," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Though it appears there's been some miscommunication about the existence of an actual school." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Jeremiah McKinnon, ma'am. Most folks call me Bear." He gestured to his considerable frame. "For obvious reasons. Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore." She extended her gloved hand, which disappeared entirely when he took it in his own. His touch was surprisingly gentle, like he was handling something precious and fragile. "Miss Whitmore, I couldn't help but overhear your predicament." Bear's voice carried the slight drawl of someone who'd spent time in Texas, mixed with something else, maybe Irish, several generations back. "I've got a proposition that might benefit us both, if you're willing to hear it." Pete the driver snorted. "Bear, you can't just go proposing to every woman who steps off the stage." "Proposing?" Sarah's voice came out as a squeak. Bear shot Pete a look that could have melted iron, then turned back to Sarah with an expression of earnest sincerity. "What Pete means is, I've got a situation that requires a wife, and you've got a situation that requires a home and employment. Might be we could help each other out." Sarah stared at him. In all her 24 years, through all the hardships and disappointments, no one had ever suggested anything quite so outrageous. "Mister, McKinnon, I don't know what kind of woman you think I am, but the educated kind, he interrupted gently. The kind who can read and write and cipher. The kind who's brave enough to travel halfway across the country for a job that might not exist. The kind who's got more backbone than half the men in this territory. He paused, his green eyes serious. The kind who might be willing to help a man keep his land legal-like in exchange for protection and a roof over her head. I don't understand. Bear glanced around, then gestured toward a rough wooden bench outside what had once been the general store. Might we sit? It's a bit of a story. Against every ounce of common sense she possessed, Sarah found herself settling onto the bench beside this gentle giant. He was careful to leave proper distance between them, she noticed, and he kept his hat in his hands like a man who'd been raised with manners. My pa came out here in '68, Bear began, his voice taking on the cadence of a man telling a story he'd told before, but never to anyone who mattered. Claimed 160 acres under the Homestead Act, built a cabin, started running cattle. He married my ma in '69, and I came along in '70. We had 12 good years before the fever took them both. Sarah felt her heart clench. She knew the particular pain of losing parents, the way it left you floating untethered in the world. I've been working the land ever since, building it up, making improvements. Got a good cabin now, a barn, corrals, a well that runs sweet and clean. But there's a problem. His jaw tightened. There's a man named Cornelius Blackwood who's got his eye on my land. He's got money, political connections, and a flexible relationship with the law. He's been buying up homesteads all through this valley, sometimes legal, sometimes not so much. What does that have to do with marriage? Blackwood's been claiming that since I'm not married, I haven't fulfilled the requirements of the Homestead Act. Says a single man can't prove he's established a permanent residence. It's not true, legally speaking, but he's got the territorial judge in his pocket, and he's been using that argument to challenge land claims all over the county. Sarah frowned. She might not know much about ranching, but she'd received a thorough education, and she knew something about law. That's not how the Homestead Act works. Marriage isn't a requirement. No, ma'am, it's not. But when the judge is corrupt and the sheriff's on Blackwood's payroll, legal precedent doesn't matter much. What matters is having something Blackwood can't argue with. Bear turned to face her fully. A wife. A family. Proof of permanent settlement that even a crooked judge would have trouble disputing. And in return, you'd have a home. Protection. I'd build you a schoolhouse on the property. There are enough families scattered through these hills to need a teacher, even if the town doesn't want to pay for one. You could charge tuition. Make your own way. He paused. It would be a marriage in name only, Miss Whitmore. You'd have your own room, your privacy, your independence. I'm not looking for. That is, I wouldn't expect. He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks, and Sarah felt something flutter in her chest that she firmly told herself was relief. This is highly irregular, Mr. McKinnon. Yes, ma'am, it island, but these are irregular times in irregular country. He met her eyes. I won't lie to you, there's danger in it. Blackwood doesn't like to lose, and he's got a mean streak. But I give you my word, I'll protect you with my life. And if you ever want to leave, if you find someone you truly want to marry, I'll give you a divorce and enough money to start over anywhere you choose. Sarah looked around at the dusty, half-abandoned town, then back at this enormous, gentle-voiced man who was offering her the impossible security, purpose, and independence, all wrapped up in one outrageous package. I'd want to see the property first, she heard herself saying. The smile that spread across Bear's face was like sunrise after the longest night. Yes, ma'am. Of course. An hour later, Sarah sat beside Bear on the bench of a sturdy wagon, her trunk secured in the back, watching the landscape roll by. The New Mexico territory was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Vast expanses of golden grass, dotted with juniper and piñon pine, red rock formations that looked like ancient castles, and mountains that stretched purple and blue toward a sky so wide it made her dizzy. It's beautiful, she murmured. Wait until you see it in the evening light, Bear said. Or in winter, when the snow caps those peaks and everything goes quiet and clean. They'd been riding for nearly 2 hours when Bear guided the wagon off the main track onto a narrower path that wound between low hills. "Almost there," he said, and Sarah could hear the pride in his voice. When they crested the final hill, Sarah's breath caught. Spread out below them was a valley that looked like something from a fairy tale. A clear stream wound through the center, lined with cottonwoods whose leaves were just beginning to turn gold. The cabin sat on a slight rise above the creek, built of honey-colored logs with a stone chimney and a wide front porch. Nearby stood a large barn, several corrals, and what looked like a workshop. "Oh," Sarah breathed. "Oh, it's lovely." "Pa chose the spot well," Bear said, his voice soft with memory. "Good water, good grass, protected from the worst of the winter winds. The cabin's got 3 rooms now," I added on after. "There's a root cellar, a smokehouse, and the workshop where I do my carpentry and metalwork." As they drew closer, Sarah could see the care that had gone into every detail. The porch railings were carved with intricate patterns, the window boxes held the remnants of summer flowers, and the whole place had an air of permanence and prosperity that spoke of years of hard work and attention. "You built all this yourself?" "Most of it. Had help with the barn raising. Of course, that's not a one-man job. But the rest." He shrugged his massive shoulders. "I like working with my hands. Always have." Bear helped her down from the wagon with the same careful gentleness he'd shown before, and Sarah found herself standing in front of what might become her home. The reality of what she was considering hit her like a physical blow. "Mr. McKinnon, Bear, I need you to understand something." She turned to face him, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. That is, I don't have any experience with marriage, or men, or any of this." "Neither do I," he said simply. "Never been married, never even come close. Spent most of my life working this land and taking care of my parents. We'd be figuring it out together." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. "How old are you?" 32, come December. 12 years older than her, but somehow that felt reassuring rather than intimidating. He had the steady, grounded presence of a man who'd faced hardship and survived it. "Would you like to see inside?" he asked. The cabin's interior was a revelation. Sarah had expected rough frontier accommodations, but Bear had clearly spent years making the space comfortable and beautiful. The main room featured a massive stone fireplace, handcrafted furniture that showed real artistry, and windows that let in streams of golden afternoon light. Braided rugs covered the plank floors, and bookshelves lined one wall. "You read?" Sarah asked, moving toward the books. "Ma taught me. She was educated back east before she married Pa. Always said a man's mind needed feeding just like his body." Bear followed her gaze to the shelves. "Most of those were hers, but I've added some over the years. Poetry mostly, and books about farming, animal husbandry, that sort of thing." Sarah ran her fingers along the spines, recognizing Shakespeare, Dickens, Emerson. She had excellent taste. "She'd have liked you," Bear said quietly. "She always said this place needed a woman's touch again." He showed her the kitchen, which was surprisingly well appointed with a modern cast-iron stove, a pump that brought water directly from the well, and cabinets that were clearly custom-built. Then he led her to a door at the back of the main room. "This would be your room," he said, opening the door to reveal a space that was clearly meant to be the master bedroom. It held a beautiful 4-poster bed, a wardrobe, a dressing table, and windows that looked out over the valley. "Where would you sleep?" "I've been using the loft. It's plenty comfortable." Sarah looked around the room, imagining herself waking up here every morning, looking out at those mountains, building a life in this beautiful, isolated place. It was everything she'd never dared to dream of, offered by a man who was nothing like anyone she'd ever met. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course. Take all the time you need." But even as she said it, Sarah knew her decision was already made. What choice did she have, really? Behind her lay nothing but charity and dependence. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also possibility. "Actually," she said, turning to face Bear in the golden light of the bedroom that might become hers, "I don't need time. I need honesty." "Why me? You could have asked any woman in the territory. Why propose to a complete stranger?" Bear was quiet for a long moment, his green eyes serious. Because you're not from here. You don't know Blackwood, don't owe him anything, don't have family he can threaten. Because you're educated and brave, and you need what I can offer as much as I need what you can offer. He paused. And because when I looked at you standing there beside that stagecoach, madder than hell, but not crying, not giving up, I thought maybe you were strong enough for this life. And if I'm not, then we'll figure it out together. Sarah took a deep breath, tasting the clean mountain air, feeling the solid wood floor beneath her feet, listening to the sound of the creek running somewhere nearby. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe fully. All right, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. The smile that spread across Bear's face was worth every risk she was taking. They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher in what remained of Silver Creek's church, with Pete, the stagecoach driver, and the preacher's wife as witnesses. Sarah wore her best dress, dark blue wool with a white collar, and Bear had somehow procured a suit that actually fit his enormous frame. Do you, Jeremiah McKinnon, take Sarah Elizabeth to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore, take Jeremiah to be your lawfully wedded husband? Sarah looked up into Bear's gentle green eyes and felt something shift inside her chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. I do. There's no one. When Bear kissed her a brief, soft press of lips that was over almost before it began, Sarah felt a flutter of something she'd never experienced before. Something that made her wonder if this marriage of convenience might become something more complicated than either of them had planned. They were loading her trunk into the wagon after the ceremony when the sound of hoofbeats made them both turn. 3 riders were approaching at a gallop, and Sarah's breath caught when she saw them clearly. 3 young Apache women, each more beautiful than the last, rode their horses with the fluid grace of people born to the saddle. The eldest looked to be about Sarah's age, with long black hair braided with silver ornaments and dark eyes that seemed to see everything. The middle sister appeared younger, perhaps 20, with a fierce expression and a rifle across her saddle. The youngest couldn't be more than 18, but she sat her horse with the same confident bearing as her sisters. They pulled up in front of Bear's wagon in a cloud of dust, and the eldest spoke in accented but clear English. Bear McKinnon, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. We need to talk. Bear stepped slightly in front of Sarah, a protective gesture that didn't go unnoticed by any of the 3 women. Morning, Ayana, Itzel, Siala. He nodded to each sister in turn. What brings you to town? The eldest Ayana swung down from her horse with fluid grace. She was dressed in traditional Apache clothing mixed with some frontier elements, a buckskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork, but also boots and a gun belt that looked well used. You know why we're here, Ayana said, her dark eyes flicking to Sarah and then back to Bear. The 3 of us have been waiting for your answer. Our father grows impatient. Sarah felt Bear tense beside her. Ayana, I told you. You told us you needed time to choose. The middle sister, Itzel, interrupted, dismounting as well. She was slightly shorter than Ayana, but carried herself with the coiled energy of a predator. Time to decide which of us would make the best wife. We have been patient, but patience has limits. The youngest, Siala, remained mounted but leaned forward in her saddle. Who is this woman, Bear? Why does she wear a white dress? Why do you stand so close to her? Sarah's mind reeled. These 3 beautiful, fierce women had been expecting Bear to choose one of them as a wife, and he'd never mentioned it? Ladies, Bear said carefully, I'd like you to meet my wife, Sarah McKinnon. We were just married. The silence that followed was so complete Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Then Ayana threw back her head and laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Your wife? Ayana's eyes glittered dangerously. You choose this pale, soft white woman over the daughters of Chief Running Wolf? Now wait just a minute, Sarah began, her temper flaring. But Bear's hand on her arm stopped her. It's not about choosing, Bear said, his voice steady, but Sarah could hear the tension underneath. I never agreed to marry any of you. I never made any promises. You accepted our father's hospitality, Itzel said, her hand resting on the handle of her knife. You ate at his fire, slept in his lodge when the winter storms trapped you in the mountains. You accepted the gifts we made for you, the shirt Ayana sewed, the knife sheath I beaded, the horse blanket Ciala wove. I accepted friendship, Bear replied. Neighborly kindness. Our father sees it differently, Ciala said, finally dismounting. Up close, Sarah could see that despite her youth, the girl had the same steel in her spine as her sisters. He has already told the tribe that one of his daughters will marry the giant white man who builds with his hands and speaks with respect. He has already accepted gifts from warriors who wish to court us, telling them we are spoken for. Sarah felt the world tilt again. But this time, it wasn't from her own problems. She'd married a man who was apparently already claimed by 3 Apache sisters, whose father was a chief, and who clearly had no intention of giving up without a fight. What exactly does that mean? Sarah asked, finding her voice. Ayana turned those dark, assessing eyes on her. It means, white woman, that you have married a man who belongs to us. It means our father will not accept this insult to his daughters and his tribe. It means he is riding here now to settle this matter in the old way. The old way? Sarah's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. Combat, Itzel said with a smile that showed too many teeth. Trial by battle. The old laws say that when multiple claims exist on the same man, the matter must be settled by strength and skill. Bear stepped fully in front of Sarah now, his massive frame blocking her from the 3 sisters. Your father's a reasonable man, Ayana. He'll listen to reason. I'll explain. You'll explain to him yourself, Ciala interrupted, pointing toward the hills. Because here he comes. Sarah turned to look where the girl was pointing and felt her blood turn to ice. A group of riders was approaching from the north, at least 20 Apache warriors in full regalia, led by a man who could only be Chief Running Wolf. Even at a distance, his authority was unmistakable. Bear, Sarah whispered. What have we gotten ourselves into? Bear's jaw was set in a hard line, but when he looked down at her, his green eyes were gentle. I don't know, Sarah, but I meant what I said. I'll protect you with my life. As the war party drew closer, Sarah could make out more details. Chief Running Wolf rode a magnificent black stallion, his long gray hair decorated with feathers, and his chest covered with a breastplate of bone and silver. The warriors flanking him were armed with rifles as well as traditional weapons, and their faces were painted for... what? War? Ceremony? Sarah didn't know enough about Apache customs to tell the difference. Maybe, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. It's time I learned what it really means to be married to Bear McKinnon. Chief Running Wolf was even more imposing up close than he had been at a distance. He sat his black stallion like he'd been born in the saddle, his weathered face carved from granite, and his dark eyes missing nothing as they swept over the small group gathered in front of the church. When his gaze settled on Sarah, she felt like a rabbit being studied by a hawk. The chief spoke in rapid Apache to his daughters, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of a father who was not pleased. Ayana responded in the same language, gesturing toward Bear and Sarah caught the word wife in English, mixed in with the flowing Apache syllables. Chief Running Wolf's expression darkened further. He dismounted with the fluid grace of a much younger man and approached Bear directly. When he spoke, his English was accented but clear. Bear McKinnon, you have dishonored my daughters. Chief Running Wolf, Bear replied, inclining his head respectfully. I have great respect for you and your family, but I never made any promises to your daughters. I never agreed to marriage. You accepted our hospitality. You took gifts from my daughter's hands. In the old ways, this creates obligation. The chief's voice was like distant thunder. My daughters have waited through 2 seasons for you to choose among them. Now you bring me this insult, a white woman you have known for 3 days. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could speak, Bear stepped forward. Sarah is my lawfully wedded wife, married before God and witnesses. I won't have her spoken of as an insult. Something that might have been approval flickered in the chief's eyes. You defend her. This is good. A man should defend his woman. He paused, studying Bear's face. But the matter of my daughters remains. They have been shamed before the tribe. Honor must be satisfied. What do you propose? Bear asked, though Sarah could hear the reluctance in his voice. Chief Running Wolf was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between Bear, Sarah, and his 3 daughters. Finally, he spoke. The old laws provide for such situations. When multiple claims exist, the matter is settled by trial. But, he held up a hand as Bear started to speak. You are married to this woman now. The trial cannot be for your hand alone. Then what? Ayana demanded, her dark eyes flashing. The trial will be for acceptance, the chief said slowly, as if working out the details as he spoke. If your white woman can prove herself worthy, if she can show she has the strength, the skill, the heart to be the wife of a man my daughters desired, then the matter is settled. My daughters will accept the marriage and find honor in having been rivals to a worthy woman. Sarah's mouth went dry. What kind of trial? Chief Running Wolf turned those penetrating dark eyes on her. 3 tests, white woman. 1 for each of my daughters. You will compete against them in the skills a wife must have. If you win 2 of the 3 contests, you keep your husband and gain the respect of my people. If you lose, he shrugged eloquently. And if I lose, then your marriage was made in haste and without wisdom. Bear McKinnon will choose one of my daughters as his true wife, and you will be free to return to your people with no shame. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet again. She looked up at Bear, whose jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. This is ridiculous, Bear said. Sarah shouldn't have to prove anything to anyone. She's my wife. Legally and properly married. White man's law, Chief Running Wolf said dismissively. But you live in Apache country now, Bear McKinnon. You have eaten our food, accepted our friendship, sheltered in our lodges. Apache law has a claim on you too. Sarah looked around at the assembled warriors, at the 3 beautiful sisters who were watching her with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility, at the man she'd married 3 days ago who was clearly prepared to fight an entire Apache war party to protect her. The smart thing would be to agree to an annulment, to take the stagecoach back to Kansas City, to find some other way to make a life for herself. The safe thing would be to admit that she was in over her head, that she had no business trying to compete with 3 Apache women who'd been born to this harsh, beautiful country. Instead, Sarah heard herself saying, "What are the 3 contests?" Chief Running Wolf smiled for the first time since his arrival, and Sarah realized where his daughters had gotten their fierce beauty. Ayana will test your skill with domestic arts, cooking, sewing, the crafts that make a home. Itzel will test your courage and your ability to defend what is yours. Siyala will test your wisdom and your knowledge of the heart. He paused. The contests will take place over 3 days, beginning tomorrow at sunrise. Tonight, you will be our guests, so that you may prepare and so that my daughters may take your measure. Guests where? Sarah asked. Our winter camp is a half-day's ride north. You will stay in my lodge, under my protection, so that no one can say the contests were unfair. Bear moved closer to Sarah, his massive presence reassuring. We'll need to go back to the ranch first, to get supplies, and… No. Chief Running Wolf's voice was final. You come now, as you are. To return to your ranch would give you time to prepare, to practice, to seek advantage. The contests must test what you already know, not what you can learn in one night. Sarah looked down at her wedding dress, the dark blue wool that was her finest garment, but hardly practical for whatever lay ahead. She thought of her trunk, still loaded in Bear's wagon, containing her few possessions and her teaching books. I'll need my trunk, she said. My clothes and personal items. Chief Running Wolf nodded to 2 of his warriors, who moved toward the wagon. It will be brought. Anything else? Sarah's mind raced. What did she know about Apache customs? About cooking over an open fire? About defending herself? About wisdom and matters of the heart? Precious little, if she was honest. But she thought about the alternative, returning to Kansas City with nothing, admitting defeat before she'd even tried to build the life she'd dreamed of. She thought about Bear's gentle hands and kind eyes, about the beautiful valley that might become her home, about the schoolhouse he'd promised to build. I accept the challenge, she said, her voice carrying more confidence than she felt. Ayana stepped forward, her expression unreadable. You are either very brave or very foolish, white woman. Probably both, Sarah admitted. But I'm also very stubborn. This time, Ayana's smile was genuine. Good. It would be no honor to defeat a weak opponent. The ride to the Apache winter camp was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. She rode beside Bear on a gentle mare that Chief Running Wolf had provided, surrounded by warriors whose presence should have been terrifying but somehow wasn't. The chief had given his word that she was under his protection, and she was beginning to understand that among the Apache, a man's word was his bond. The landscape they traveled through was breathtaking, red rock canyons that glowed like fire in the afternoon sun, hidden valleys where ancient petroglyphs decorated stone walls, and always the vast sky that seemed to stretch forever. Sarah found herself understanding why Bear had fallen in love with this country, why he was willing to fight to keep his small piece of it. "You don't have to do this," Bear said quietly as they rode. "We could leave tonight, head for California or Colorado, start over somewhere else." "And let Blackwood have your land? Let him win?" Sarah shook her head. "Besides, where would we go? I have no money, no prospects, and now I'm married to a man I barely know. At least here, I have a chance to build something." "You could get an annulment. Say the marriage was made under duress." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him. His green eyes were troubled, his jaw set in hard lines, and she realized he was genuinely prepared to give up everything to protect her from a challenge she'd accepted of her own free will. "Is that what you want?" she asked. "I want you to be safe. I want you to be happy. I want you to be happy." He stopped, shaking his head. "It doesn't matter what I want. I got you into this mess." "We got ourselves into this mess," Sarah corrected, "and we'll get ourselves out of it. Together." Something shifted in Bear's expression, a warmth that made Sarah's heart skip in a way that was becoming disturbingly familiar. The Apache winter camp was larger than Sarah had expected, with dozens of traditional wickiups arranged in careful patterns around a central area where cook fires burned and children played. The arrival of the war party caused a stir, and Sarah found herself the object of curious stares from Apache women and children who had clearly heard about the white woman who had married Bear McKinnon. Chief Running Wolf's lodge was impressive, a large structure that could easily house a dozen people, decorated with intricate designs and furnished with beautiful woven rugs and carved wooden items. Sarah was given a place of honor near the fire, with Bear beside her, while the chief's family arranged themselves around the circle. "Tonight we feast," Chief Running Wolf announced. "Tomorrow we begin the trials. But first, my daughters will explain what you will face." Ayanna spoke first, her voice formal but not unkind. "The first test is the test of the home. You must prepare a meal that would feed a family through a hard day's work, using only what the land provides and what a woman can carry. You must also create something beautiful and useful with your hands, something that shows you can make a house into a home." Sarah nodded, her mind already racing. She could cook, though she'd never had to forage for ingredients or work over an open fire. And she could sew, though she'd never worked with leather or traditional Apache materials. Itzel spoke next, her voice carrying the edge of a blade. "The second test is the test of courage. You must prove that you can defend your home, your family, your honor. This is not just about weapons, though you will need to show skill with knife and rifle. It is about heart, about the willingness to stand when others would run." Sarah's mouth went dry. She'd never held a weapon in her life, never faced physical danger, never had to rely on anything but her wits and her education. Finally, Ciala spoke, her young voice surprisingly deep and thoughtful. "The third test is the test of wisdom. You must show that you understand what it means to be a wife, a partner, a woman who can guide and counsel as well as follow and support. This test cannot be explained, it must be lived." "And if I fail?" Sarah asked. "Then you fail with honor," Chief Running Wolf said simply. "And Bear McKinnon chooses a new wife from among my daughters, as was always meant to be." The feast that followed was a revelation. Sarah had never tasted food like this venison, cooked with wild herbs, corn prepared in ways she'd never imagined, fruits and vegetables that grew wild in the desert but had been transformed into delicacies by skilled hands. The Apache women who served the meal watched her carefully, noting how she ate, how she thanked them, how she conducted herself. After the meal, there was music and storytelling around the fire. Sarah listened, fascinated, as the Apache oral tradition unfolded in songs and tales that stretched back generations. When Chief Running Wolf asked if she had any stories to share, she found herself reciting passages from Shakespeare and Dickens, translating the complex language into simpler terms but keeping the heart of the stories intact. The Apache listeners were captivated, especially the children, and Sarah realized she was doing what she'd always done best: teaching, sharing knowledge, building bridges between different worlds. "You have a gift for words," Ayana said quietly as the evening wound down. "This is good. A woman should be able to speak wisdom as well as live it." "Thank you," Sarah replied. "Your people have been very kind to a stranger." "You are not a stranger," Ayana corrected. "You are Bear McKinnon's woman, and he is known to us. Also, you are brave enough to face our trials. This makes you worthy of respect, whatever the outcome." Later, as Sarah settled onto the soft furs that had been provided for her bed, she found herself staring up at the smoke hole in the lodge roof, watching stars she'd never seen before wheel across the vast desert sky. "Sarah?" Bear's voice came softly from his own sleeping area nearby. "Yes? I'm proud of you. The way you handled yourself tonight. The way you're facing all this, my ma would have been proud too." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. "Tell me about her. About your parents." Bear was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then his voice came through the darkness, soft and full of memory. "Ma was from Boston originally. Came west with her first husband, who died of cholera on the trail. Pa found her in Denver, working as a seamstress to survive, and fell in love with her the first time he heard her laugh. She used to say the frontier was hard on women, but it was also the only place where a woman could truly be free to become who she was meant to be." "She sounds wonderful." "She was. She taught me to read, to think, to see beauty in small things. Pa taught me to work with my hands, to build things that would last, to treat the land with respect." Bear paused. "They would have liked you, Sarah. They would have understood why I married you. Even under these circumstances?" "Especially under these circumstances. They believed in taking chances on good people, in building something worthwhile even when the odds were against you." Sarah closed her eyes, listening to the sounds of the camp settling for the night. The soft murmur of voices, the crackle of dying fires, the distant call of a night bird. Tomorrow would bring the first test, and she had no idea if she was strong enough, skilled enough, brave enough to pass. But tonight, lying in an Apache lodge beside the man she'd married 3 days ago, listening to him talk about parents who'd loved each other enough to build a life in the wilderness, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt like she belonged somewhere. The first test began at dawn, with Ayana leading Sarah away from the camp to a small canyon where a clear spring provided fresh water. The area had been set up like an outdoor kitchen, with fire pits, cooking stones, and an array of baskets containing various ingredients. "You have until the sun reaches its highest point," Ayana explained. "You must prepare a meal that would satisfy a working man and his family, using only what you find here and what you can gather from the land around us. You must also create something useful and beautiful for the home." Sarah looked around at the supplies available: corn, beans, dried meat, wild onions, various herbs and spices she didn't recognize, clay for pottery, reeds for weaving, and basic tools for cooking and crafting. "May I ask questions about the ingredients?" Ayana nodded. A wise woman learns from those who know more than she does. For the next hour, Sarah received a crash course in desert cooking and Apache domestic arts. She learned which plants were edible, how to prepare corn in the traditional way, how to season meat with wild herbs, and how to weave baskets from pine needles and willow shoots. Then she was on her own. Sarah had always been a practical person, good at solving problems and learning quickly. She started with what she knew, basic cooking principles, and adapted them to the available ingredients and methods. She built up her fire carefully, set water to boil in a clay pot, and began preparing a stew that combined the dried meat with wild vegetables and herbs. While the stew simmered, she worked on her craft project. Weaving was beyond her skill level in the time available, but she had an idea. Using the clay and her knowledge of pottery techniques she'd learned as a child, she began shaping a set of small bowls, decorating them with patterns inspired by the Apache designs she'd seen but filtered through her own aesthetic sense. The work was harder than she'd expected. Cooking over an open fire required constant attention and adjustment. The clay was different from any she'd worked with before, requiring different techniques to prevent cracking. Her hands were soon covered in burns and cuts, her dress stained with smoke and clay. But as the morning progressed, Sarah found herself falling into a rhythm. There was something deeply satisfying about creating something useful and beautiful with her own hands, about coaxing flavor from simple ingredients, about solving problems through skill and intuition rather than book learning. When the sun reached its zenith, Ayanna returned with Chief Running Wolf, Bear, and several other Apache women who would serve as judges. Sarah's stew was bubbling fragrantly. Her bowls were drying in the sun, and she was exhausted but oddly exhilarated. "Present your work," Chief Running Wolf said formally. Sarah ladled the stew into gourds and passed them around, then displayed her bowls, explaining her choices and techniques. The judges ate in silence, their faces revealing nothing. Finally, Ayanna spoke. "The food is good. Not traditional, but flavorful and nourishing. You adapted well to unfamiliar ingredients and methods." She picked up one of the clay bowls, examining the decoration. "The pottery shows skill and an eye for beauty. The patterns honor our traditions while showing your own spirit." Chief Running Wolf nodded slowly. "You passed the first test, white woman. You have shown that you can make a home, not just live in one." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief. 1 down, 2 to go. The second test took place that afternoon in a clearing near the camp where targets had been set up and weapons laid out. Itzel stood waiting, dressed in buckskin pants and a shirt that allowed for easy movement, her long black hair braided back severely. "The test of courage has 3 parts," Itzel announced. "First, you must show skill with weapons, knife throwing, and rifle shooting. Second, you must demonstrate that you can defend yourself in hand-to-hand combat. Third, you must prove that you have the heart of a warrior when faced with real danger." Sarah looked at the array of weapons knives of various sizes, a rifle, and what appeared to be practice weapons for sparring. Her heart sank. She'd never thrown a knife in her life, had only fired a rifle once as a child, and had certainly never engaged in hand-to-hand combat. "I should tell you," she said honestly, "I have almost no experience with weapons or fighting." Itzel's expression didn't change. "Then you will learn quickly, or you will fail. A woman on the frontier cannot afford to be helpless." For the next 2 hours, Sarah received the most intensive and terrifying education of her life. Itzel was a demanding but effective teacher, showing her how to grip a knife for throwing, how to sight down a rifle barrel, how to use an opponent's momentum against them in a fight. Sarah's first attempts were disasters. Her knives went wide of the targets, her rifle shots scattered across the landscape, and she found herself flat on her back within seconds, every time Itzel demonstrated a fighting technique. But gradually, painfully, she began to improve. Her natural coordination and quick mind served her well once she understood the basic principles. More importantly, she discovered something about herself she'd never known when pushed to her limits. When faced with a challenge that seemed impossible, she didn't give up. She got angry, and anger made her focused. By the time the sun was beginning to set, Sarah could hit the target with a thrown knife more often than not, could put rifle shots in the general vicinity of where she was aiming, and had managed to stay on her feet for a full minute while sparring with Itzel. "Better," Itzel said, breathing only slightly harder than when they'd started. "But the real test is not skill with weapons. It is what you do when faced with true danger." As if summoned by her words, a commotion erupted from the direction of the camp. Shouts, the sound of horses, and then a gunshot that echoed off the canyon walls. "Riders coming in fast," Bear called, appearing at the edge of the clearing with his rifle in his hands. "Armed men, flying Blackwood's colors." Sarah felt ice form in her veins. Cornelius Blackwood had found them. "How many?" Itzel demanded, instantly alert. "Dozen, maybe more. They're riding hard and they don't look friendly." Chief Running Wolf appeared beside Bear, his face grim. "They come to my camp armed and uninvited. This is an insult that cannot be ignored." Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her Apache warriors preparing for battle. Bear checking his weapons. Itzel's hand moving instinctively to her knife. In a few minutes, there would be violence, possibly death. And it would all be because of her marriage to Bear McKinnon. "This is my fault," she said. "Blackwood is here because of me, because of our marriage. I should..." You should stand with your husband and your people, Itzel interrupted fiercely. You should show these white men what it means to threaten an Apache camp and the woman under our protection. I don't know how to fight a battle, Sarah protested. Then learn, Itzel said, pressing a rifle into Sarah's hands. The third part of your test begins now. The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder as Sarah gripped the rifle Itzel had thrust into her hands. Her palms were slick with sweat, and her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Through the trees, she could see dust clouds rising as the riders approached the Apache camp. Stay close to me, Bear said, his voice calm despite the tension radiating from his massive frame. Whatever happens, don't try to be a hero. Just stay alive. Chief Running Wolf barked orders in Apache, and his warriors melted into defensive positions with the fluid efficiency of men who'd fought together for years. Sarah found herself crouched behind a fallen log beside Bear and Itzel, watching as a dozen armed men rode into the camp clearing. Cornelius Blackwood was exactly what Sarah had expected, a man in his 50s with silver hair, expensive clothes, and the kind of soft face that came from years of letting other people do his dirty work. He sat his horse like a man unaccustomed to the saddle, and his pale eyes swept the camp with obvious distaste. Chief, Running Wolf, Blackwood called out, his voice carrying the false haughtiness of a politician. I apologize for the intrusion, but I'm looking for a man named Jeremiah McKinnon and a woman who may be traveling with him. The chief stepped into the clearing, flanked by two of his warriors. His presence was so commanding that even Blackwood's horse seemed to sense it, shifting nervously beneath its rider. You come to my camp armed and without invitation, Chief Running Wolf said, his English formal and precise. You bring many men with guns to a place where children sleep. Explain this behavior. Blackwood's smile was thin and cold. I'm a territorial representative, Chief. I have authority to pursue criminals and fugitives wherever they may hide. What crime has been committed? Fraud, for one thing. McKinnon has been claiming land that doesn't belong to him, using forged documents and false testimony. And the woman Blackwood's gaze swept the camp. She's wanted for questioning in connection with a theft back in Kansas City. Sarah's blood turned to ice. It was a lie, of course, but a clever one. Out here, far from any real law enforcement, Blackwood's word would carry weight simply because he had the men and guns to back it up. You lie, Chief Running Wolf said simply. Blackwood's face flushed red. I don't think you understand the situation here, Chief. I'm offering you a chance to turn over these fugitives peacefully. If you refuse, I'll be forced to search your camp, and I can't guarantee the safety of your people if they resist. The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Sarah could see the Apache warriors tensing, hands moving to weapons, and she realized that in a few seconds, this confrontation would explode into violence that could leave dozens dead. Wait, she said, standing up from behind the log before Bear could stop her. I'm Sarah McKinnon. If you want to talk to me, here I am. Blackwood's pale eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. Mrs. McKinnon, how convenient. You'll come with us now, along with your husband. We have questions that need answering. I'll bet you do, Bear said, rising to his full, imposing height. Questions like how much it'll cost to make your lies stick, and how many people you'll have to kill to steal my land. Careful, McKinnon. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise, Bear replied, his voice deadly quiet. You want my land. You'll have to take it over my dead body. Blackwood smiled, and Sarah realized with horror that he'd been hoping for exactly this response. Threatening a territorial official in front of witnesses. That's another charge to add to the list. Enough, Chief Running Wolf said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. You have made accusations without proof, threats without honor. In Apache law, such behavior demands satisfaction. I don't give a damn about Apache law, Blackwood snapped, his politician's mask finally slipping. This is American territory, and American law applies here. You are in my camp, on my land, threatening my guests, the chief replied. Here, Apache law applies. And Apache law says that when a man makes accusations against another, he must prove them in combat, or be proven a liar and a coward. Sarah saw Blackwood's eyes narrow as he calculated odds. He had more men, but they were in the middle of an Apache camp, surrounded by warriors who knew every rock and tree. A fight here would be costly, even if he won. I didn't come here to fight Indians, Blackwood said finally. I came for McKinnon and his woman. Hand them over, and we'll leave peacefully. No, Sarah said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. I won't go anywhere with you, Mr. Blackwood, and you have no authority to make me. I have 12 armed men who say otherwise, and I have the protection of Chief Running Wolf and his warriors, Sarah replied, feeling strength flow into her voice as she spoke. I'm under Apache law now, and Apache law says you're a liar and a coward who makes threats he can't back up. The silence that followed was so complete, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat. Then Blackwood laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You think hiding behind savages will protect you? You think... He never finished the sentence. Itzel's knife appeared in her hand as if by magic, and suddenly it was quivering in the ground between Blackwood's horse's front hooves, having passed close enough to the animal's chest to draw a thin line of blood. The horse reared, nearly unseating Blackwood, and chaos erupted as his men reached for their weapons. But they found themselves staring down the barrels of Apache rifles that had appeared with the same magical speed as Itzel's knife. The next knife finds your heart, Itzel said conversationally. Call my people savages again, and see what happens. Blackwood fought to control his terrified horse, his face white with rage and fear. This isn't over, he snarled. I'll be back with federal marshals, with the territorial militia if necessary. You can't hide behind Indians forever. We're not hiding, Bear said, stepping forward. We're standing our ground. You want my land, Blackwood? Come and take it. But come alone, like a man, not hiding behind hired guns and corrupt badges. Gladly, Blackwood spat. Name the time and place. Chief Running Wolf stepped forward before Bear could respond. The challenge has been made and accepted, but it will be fought according to Apache law, on Apache land, with Apache witnesses. 3 days from now, at sunrise, in the Canyon of the Red Rocks. Single combat. To the death or surrender. I don't agree to enim. You have already agreed, the chief interrupted. You came to my land, threatened my guests, insulted my people. Honor demands satisfaction. If you refuse, you will be known as a coward throughout the territory, and no man will follow you or fear you again. Sarah could see the calculation in Blackwood's eyes. His reputation, his power, his ability to intimidate, all of it depended on the perception that he was dangerous, that he always won. To back down now would destroy him as surely as losing the fight. Fine, he said finally. 3 days. But when I kill your pet giant, I'll be back for the woman and the land. If you win, Chief Running Wolf said simply, you may claim whatever Apache law allows. If you lose, he shrugged eloquently. Blackwood wheeled his horse around and spurred it toward the edge of the camp, his men following in a cloud of dust and muttered curses. Sarah watched them go, her knees suddenly weak as the adrenaline drained from her system. Well, Itzel said, retrieving her knife and wiping it clean. That was interesting. You stood your ground, white woman. You showed courage when it mattered. I was terrified, Sarah admitted. Good. Only fools feel no fear. Brave people feel fear and act anyway. Itzel sheathed her knife with a fluid motion. You passed the second test. Sarah felt a surge of relief, but it was quickly overwhelmed by a new fear. Bear, you can't fight him. It's not worth it. It's not about worth, Bear replied, his green eyes serious. It's about right and wrong. Blackwood's been terrorizing homesteaders for years, stealing land, ruining lives. Someone has to stop him. But what if... Sarah couldn't finish the sentence. What if you die? What if I lose you before I even really have you? Bear seemed to understand what she couldn't say. He reached out and took her hand in his massive, gentle grip. I won't lose, Sarah. I can't afford to. That night, as the camp settled into an uneasy quiet, Sarah found herself unable to sleep. The third test, Ciala's test of wisdom, was scheduled for the next morning, but all she could think about was the fight that would come after. The fight that would determine whether she had a future with Bear McKinnon, or whether she'd be a widow before she'd truly been a wife. She slipped out of the lodge and found Bear sitting by the dying fire, staring into the coals. He looked up as she approached, and she saw her own fears reflected in his eyes. Can't sleep either? He asked softly. Too much to think about. Sarah settled beside him on the log he was using as a seat, careful to maintain proper distance, but close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his large frame. "Sarah, I need you to know something," Bear said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If something happens to me, if Blackwood—" "Don't," Sarah interrupted. "Don't talk like that." "I have to. There are things you need to know. Practical things. The deed to the ranch is in a strongbox under the floorboards in the bedroom. There's money hidden there too. Enough to get you back east or wherever you want to go. And there's a letter." "Bear, stop." "There's a letter I wrote to my lawyer in Santa Fe, explaining everything about Blackwood, about the land grabbing, about the corruption. If something happens to me, you take that letter to the territorial governor. Don't trust the local law, half of them are in Blackwood's pocket." Sarah turned to face him fully, seeing the pain and determination in his green eyes. "You're not going to die. I won't let you." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You won't let me? How do you figure to stop it?" "I don't know yet, but I'll think of something." Sarah surprised herself by reaching out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I just found you, Bear McKinnon. I'm not ready to lose you." The look in his eyes changed, becoming something deeper and more complex than simple affection. "Sarah, I know this marriage started as a business arrangement," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I know we barely know each other, and I know I'm not the kind of woman you probably dreamed of marrying. But these past few days, being with you, seeing how you treat people, how you stand up for what's right—" "You're exactly the kind of woman I dreamed of marrying," Bear interrupted softly. "Strong, brave, intelligent, beautiful. I just never thought I'd be lucky enough to find her." Sarah's breath caught. "Bear, I'm falling in love with you, Sarah McKinnon," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know it's too soon. I know it's crazy, but I can't help it. You're everything I never knew I wanted." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm falling in love with you too, which is why you can't die on me. It wouldn't be fair." Bear's laugh was soft and warm. "No, ma'am, it wouldn't be fair at all." He leaned down and kissed her then. Not the brief, formal kiss of their wedding ceremony, but something deeper and more real. Sarah felt herself melting into his warmth, her hands fisting in his shirt, her heart racing with emotions she'd never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bear rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "I want you to know that these have been the best days of my life." "They're not going to be the last," Sarah said fiercely. "I won't let them be." The third test began at dawn, with Sayala leading Sarah to a quiet grove beside the stream that ran through the canyon. The youngest of Chief Running Wolf's daughters had prepared a simple circle of stones with a small fire burning in the center. "The test of wisdom cannot be explained," Sayala said, settling gracefully onto a woven mat. "It must be experienced. Sit with me, and we will talk." Sarah lowered herself onto the mat across from the young Apache woman, studying her face in the flickering firelight. Sayala was beautiful, like her sisters, but there was something different about her, a depth and stillness that seemed older than her years. "What do you want to know?" Sarah asked. "Everything," Sayala replied simply. "Tell me about your life before you came here. Tell me about your dreams, your fears, your understanding of what it means to be a woman, a wife, a partner to a man like Bear McKinnon." For the next several hours, Sarah found herself talking more openly than she ever had in her life. She told Sayala about growing up as the daughter of a schoolteacher and a minister, about the education that had opened doors and closed others, about the loneliness of being too smart for most men's comfort and too independent for society's expectations. She talked about her parents' deaths, about the relatives who'd taken her in out of duty rather than love, about the desperate hope that had driven her west to take a teaching position that didn't exist. She talked about the fear and excitement of marrying a stranger, about the growing feelings that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Sayala listened without judgment, asking occasional questions that seemed to cut straight to the heart of things Sarah had never fully understood about herself. "You speak of love as if it is something that happens to you," Sayala observed, "like weather or sickness. But love is a choice, made new each day. Do you understand this?" "I'm beginning to," Sarah admitted. And do you understand what it means to be a partner to a man like Bear? He is strong, but strength can become stubbornness. He is protective, but protection can become control. He carries pain from his past, and pain can make a man close to the future. How will you help him grow while growing yourself? Sarah thought about the question seriously. I think partnership means being strong enough to stand beside him, not behind him. It means being honest about what I need while supporting what he needs. It means building something together that's bigger than either of us could create alone. Ciala nodded slowly. And what of children? Of the future? Bear's land is beautiful but isolated. The life there will be hard, sometimes dangerous. Are you prepared for the loneliness, the responsibility, the sacrifices? I don't know, Sarah said honestly. I hope I am. I want to be, but I won't know until I'm tested. Good answer. A wise woman knows the limits of her knowledge. Ciala stirred the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the morning air. One more question. If Bear dies in the fight with Blackwood, what will you do? Sarah felt her heart clench, but she forced herself to think through the question seriously. I'll grieve. I'll be angry, but I won't give up. I'll take his evidence to the territorial governor. I'll fight to keep his land from being stolen, and I'll build the school he promised me. I'll make sure his death means something. Even though you would be alone in a hostile place, with enemies who want to destroy you? Especially then, Sarah said fiercely. Because that's what partners do, they finish what they started together, even if they have to finish it alone. Ciala was quiet for a long moment, studying Sarah's face in the firelight. Finally, she smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from any of the three sisters. You passed the test of wisdom, Sarah McKinnon, she said formally. You understand that love is a choice, that partnership requires strength, and that wisdom comes from knowing both your power and your limitations. Sarah felt a surge of relief and accomplishment, but it was quickly overshadowed by the knowledge of what came next. Tomorrow, Bear would face Blackwood in single combat, and all the tests in the world wouldn't matter if she lost the man she was learning to love. That evening, Chief Running Wolf called the entire camp together for a ceremony Sarah didn't fully understand, but felt honored to witness. The three sisters stood before their father and the assembled tribe, and Ayanna spoke in formal Apache before switching to English. We have tested the white woman who married Bear McKinnon, she announced. We have found her worthy of respect, worthy of the man we desired, worthy to be called sister. She turned to Sarah. You have proven yourself in the skills of the home, the courage of the warrior, and the wisdom of the heart. We accept your marriage and offer you our friendship. Itzel stepped forward next. You stood with us against our enemies. You showed courage when it mattered. We would be honored to fight beside you again. Finally, Ciala approached Sarah with something in her hands, a beautiful necklace of silver and turquoise that caught the firelight like captured stars. This was our grandmother's, she said, fastening it around Sarah's neck. She was a woman who chose love over safety, who built a life in the wilderness with a man who respected her strength. We give it to you as a symbol of sisterhood and as protection for the trials ahead. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as the weight of the necklace settled against her throat. Thank you, all of you. I don't have the words. Words are not needed between sisters, Ayanna said simply. Chief Running Wolf stepped forward, his weathered face grave. Tomorrow, your husband fights for his honor and your future. Win or lose, you will always have a place among my people. This I swear by the old laws and the old ways. That night, Sarah lay in the lodge listening to Bear's quiet breathing from across the space, her fingers touching the silver necklace that marked her acceptance into a family she'd never expected to find. Tomorrow would bring the fight that would determine everything her future. Bear's life, the fate of the land they both loved. But tonight, for the first time since her parents died, Sarah McKinnon felt like she truly belonged somewhere, and that knowledge gave her something she'd been missing for years. Hope. Dawn came too soon, painting the Red Rock Canyon in shades of gold and crimson that would have been beautiful under any other circumstances. Sarah stood at the edge of the Apache camp, watching Bear check his weapons one final time, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The canyon Chief Running Wolf had chosen for the combat was a natural amphitheater, with steep walls rising on 3 sides and a flat, sandy floor perfect for fighting. Apache warriors had already taken positions on the rim, while Sarah found herself seated on a ledge beside the 3 sisters, all of whom had insisted on witnessing what they called the settling of honor. "He's a good fighter," Ayana said quietly, her dark eyes fixed on Bear's massive form as he moved through a series of stretching exercises. "We've seen him work. He's strong, fast for his size, and he thinks before he acts." "Blackwood's no warrior," Itzel added with contempt. "He's soft, used to letting other men do his fighting. But he's desperate now, and desperate men are dangerous." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd barely slept, her mind racing through every possible outcome, every way this could go wrong. The rational part of her knew that Bear was younger, stronger, and more experienced in frontier life than Blackwood. But the part of her that was learning to love him could only see the 1,000 ways she might lose him. The sound of approaching horses drew everyone's attention to the canyon entrance. Blackwood rode in with only 2 companions, this time a thin man with the look of a hired gunfighter, and another who wore a badge that probably meant nothing out here but gave Blackwood a veneer of legal authority. Blackwood himself looked like he'd spent a sleepless night. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his silver hair disheveled, and his pale eyes held the wild look of a man who'd backed himself into a corner with no way out but through. Chief Running Wolf descended to the canyon floor with ceremonial dignity, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Cornelius Blackwood, you have made accusations against Bear McKinnon and threatened his woman under my protection. Apache law demands satisfaction through combat. Do you accept these terms?" "I accept," Blackwood said, dismounting with obvious reluctance. "Single combat, to the death or surrender. Choose your weapons." Blackwood gestured to his gunfighter companion, who produced a pair of matched pistols from a leather case. "Firearms. 20 paces. Turn and fire on the signal." Bear shook his head. "No guns. This isn't about who's the faster draw, it's about who's in the right. Hand weapons only." "Afraid you can't outdraw me, McKinnon?" "Afraid you'll have your man put a rifle bullet in my back while I'm walking away from you," Bear replied calmly. "Knives or bare hands? Your choice." Sarah could see the calculation in Blackwood's eyes. He was probably a decent shot with a pistol, but knife fighting required a different kind of skill, one that came from years of hard living rather than target practice at a gentleman's club. "Knives," Blackwood said finally. The 2 men faced each other in the center of the canyon, each holding a long-bladed knife that glinted in the morning. Sunday Bear looked calm, centered, his green eyes focused but not angry. Blackwood was sweating despite the cool air, his grip on his weapon too tight, his stance betraying his inexperience. "Begin," Chief Running Wolf commanded. For a moment, neither man moved. Then Blackwood lunged forward with a wild swing that would have been devastating if it had connected. But Bear wasn't there. He'd stepped aside with fluid grace, letting Blackwood's momentum carry him past. "Easy," Bear said quietly. "No need to make this harder than it has to be. Surrender now, and you can ride away." Blackwood's answer was another wild attack, this one even more desperate than the first. Again, Bear avoided the blade with minimal effort, but this time he struck back not with his knife, but with his free hand, delivering a blow to Blackwood's wrist that sent the man's weapon spinning away across the sand. Blackwood stumbled, clutching his wrist, his face white with pain and fear. Bear could have ended it, then could have put his knife to Blackwood's throat and demanded surrender. Instead, he stepped back and waited. "Pick up your knife," Bear said. "I won't kill an unarmed man." It was an act of mercy that Sarah knew Blackwood didn't deserve, but it was also quintessentially Bear honorable, even when honor wasn't required. Gentle, even in the midst of violence. Blackwood retrieved his weapon with his offhand, his dominant wrist clearly injured. But instead of continuing the fight, he did something that caught everyone off guard. He smiled. "You always were too soft, McKinnon," he said. And suddenly there was a small pistol in his left hand, pulled from a concealed holster. "That's why you'll never—" The gunshot echoed off the canyon walls like thunder, but it wasn't Blackwood who fired. Itzel's rifle spoke from the rim above, and Blackwood's hidden pistol went flying, along with 2 of his fingers. Blackwood screamed, falling to his knees and clutching his mangled hand. The canyon erupted in chaos as his two companions reached for their weapons, only to find themselves staring down the barrels of a dozen Apache rifles. "Treachery," Chief Running Wolf said, his voice carrying the cold finality of a death sentence. "You agreed to single combat with knives, then drew a hidden gun. This is the act of a coward and a liar." "I demand," Blackwood began, but Bear's voice cut him off. "You demand nothing," Bear said, his gentle demeanor replaced by something harder and more dangerous than Sarah had ever seen. "You came to my wedding, threatened my wife, invaded an Apache camp with armed men, and now you've tried to murder me with a hidden weapon. You're done, Blackwood." Bear reached into his shirt and pulled out a folded document, tossing it onto the sand in front of the kneeling man. "That's a copy of a letter I sent to the territorial governor 3 months ago, detailing every illegal land grab you've made, every bribe you've paid, every family you've destroyed." The original is already in Santa Fe, along with sworn statements from a dozen witnesses. Blackwood's face went from white to gray. "You can't prove." "I can prove all of it. Names, dates, amounts. The governor's been looking for an excuse to clean house in this territory, and you just gave him everything he needs." Bear's smile was cold as winter wind. "You're finished, Blackwood. Your political connections won't save you from federal charges." Sarah felt a surge of fierce pride. Her husband and he truly was her husband now. In every way that mattered had been planning this for months, building a case, gathering evidence, preparing for exactly this moment. "Take him away," Chief Running Wolf commanded his warriors. "Bind his wounds so he doesn't bleed to death. Then escort him and his men to the territorial boundary. If any of them return to Apache lands, kill them." As Blackwood was dragged away, still clutching his injured hand and babbling threats that everyone knew were empty, Bear climbed up to the ledge where Sarah waited. She threw herself into his arms without caring who was watching, holding him tight enough to convince herself he was really alive and unhurt. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "It's finally over." "I was so scared," Sarah whispered against his chest. "When he pulled that gun, but he didn't win. We did. Together." Bear pulled back to look into her eyes. "Ready to go home, Mrs. McKinnon?" Sarah felt her heart skip at the way he said her married name, like it was something precious and wonderful. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready to go home." The journey back to Bear's ranch, their ranch, now took most of the day. But Sarah didn't mind. She rode beside her husband through the beautiful New Mexico landscape, watching the way the afternoon light painted the mountains purple and gold, breathing air so clean and sweet it made her dizzy with possibility. They talked as they rode, really talked, perhaps for the first time since their hasty marriage. Bear told her about his plans for expanding the ranch, about the cattle he wanted to buy, about the improvements he'd been dreaming of making. Sarah shared her ideas for the school, her thoughts about curriculum and teaching methods, her excitement about the chance to educate children who might never have had that opportunity otherwise. "There's something I need to tell you," Bear said as they crested the hill that looked down into their valley. "About the Apache sisters. About why they thought I was going to marry one of them." Sarah felt a flutter of something that might have been jealousy, but she kept her voice steady. "What about them? Last winter, I got caught in a blizzard up in the high country. Would have died if Running Wolf's hunting party hadn't found me and brought me to their winter camp. I spent 3 weeks there, recovering from frostbite and fever." Bear's voice was carefully neutral. "The sisters took care of me, and I think they got the wrong idea about my gratitude." "Did you encourage them?" "No. But I didn't discourage them either, not clearly enough. I was grateful for their help, and I enjoyed their company, but I never felt what I feel for you." He turned to look at her, his green eyes serious. "I need you to know that, Sarah. What I feel for you is different from anything I've ever experienced." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. "What do you feel for me?" Bear was quiet for a moment, as if choosing his words carefully. "Like I've been waiting my whole life for you to walk off that stagecoach. Like everything that happened before was just preparation for meeting you. Like I want to spend the rest of my life learning everything there is to know about Sarah Elizabeth McKinnon. Even though I can't cook over an open fire or throw a knife or any of the things a frontier wife should know, especially because of that," Bear said with a smile. "You're going to keep me on my toes for the next 50 years, aren't you?" At least 50 years, Sarah agreed, feeling giddy with happiness and possibility. When they reached the cabin, Bear insisted on carrying Sarah over the threshold, despite her laughing protests that it was unnecessary. But as he set her down in the main room, with the golden afternoon light streaming through the windows and the smell of pine and wood smoke surrounding them, Sarah understood why he'd wanted to observe the tradition. This was their beginning. Their real beginning. As husband and wife who'd chosen each other not out of desperation or convenience, but out of love. "Welcome home, Mrs. McKinnon," Bear said softly. "It's good to be home, Mr. McKinnon," Sarah replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. That evening, as they sat together on the front porch, watching the sun set over the mountains, Sarah reflected on everything that had happened in the past week. 7 days ago, she'd been a desperate woman with no prospects and no future. Now she was a married woman, with a home, a purpose, and a love she'd never dared to dream of. "Bear?" she said, leaning against his solid warmth as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "When you build my schoolhouse, I want it to have big windows, so the children can see the mountains while they're learning." "Big windows it is," Bear agreed, his arm tightening around her. "Anything else?" "A bell tower. Every proper school needs a bell tower." "Of course it does." Sarah smiled, already imagining the sound of children's laughter echoing across the valley, the sight of young faces bent over books and slates, the satisfaction of watching minds grow and expand under her guidance. "And Bear?" "Yes, love?" The endearment made her heart skip, but she pressed on. "I want to invite the Apache children to attend too." Ayana, Itzel, and Siala could help translate, and the children could learn from each other. Bear was quiet for a moment, and Sarah wondered if she'd overstepped. Then he chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "You know what you're suggesting? A school where Apache and white children learn together? The territorial authorities will have apoplexy." "Let them," Sarah said firmly. "Education should be for everyone, regardless of race or background. Besides, after what we've been through, I think we've proven that different peoples can work together when they respect each other." "That we have," Bear agreed. "All right, Mrs. McKinnon. Big windows, a bell tower, and a school that welcomes all children. Anything else?" Sarah turned in his arms to face him, seeing her own happiness reflected in his green eyes. "Just this," she said, and kissed him under the vast New Mexico sky, tasting the promise of all the tomorrows they would build together. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of the McKinnon School for All Children, watching her students, 12 in total, ranging in age from 6 to 14, including 2 of Chief Running Wolf's grandchildren, work on their arithmetic lessons. The big windows Bear had installed let in streams of golden morning light, and the bell in the tower above had rung out across the valley just an hour before, calling the children to learning. "Mrs. McKinnon?" 8-year-old Tommy Henderson raised his hand. "I finished my sums. Can I help Maria with hers?" Sarah smiled, watching the blonde boy move to assist the young Apache girl who was struggling with long division. In the 6 months since the school had opened, she'd watched barriers dissolve and friendships form that would have been impossible in the more civilized parts of the territory. "Excellent work, Tommy. Maria, remember what we practiced about carrying numbers." The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Sarah look up from her lesson. Bear was riding in from the north pasture, and even at a distance she could see the smile on his face. The cattle drive to Santa Fe had been successful, bringing in enough money to expand the herd and make the improvements they'd been planning. But more than that, the letter he carried in his saddlebags contained news that would change everything. Cornelius Blackwood had been convicted on federal charges and sentenced to 10 years in territorial prison. The land he'd stolen was being returned to its rightful owners, and a new territorial judge had been appointed to clean up the corruption that had plagued the region for years. "Children," Sarah announced, "let's take our afternoon recess a bit early today. Practice your reading assignments, and we'll discuss them tomorrow." As the students filed out, chattering in a mixture of English and Apache, Sarah stepped onto the school's front porch to wait for her husband. The sight of him never failed to make her heart skip. All 6 feet 10 inches of gentle giant, riding across their valley with the easy grace of a man completely at home in his world. "Good day at school?" Bear asked as he dismounted, his green eyes warm with the love that had only grown stronger over the past months. "The best," Sarah replied, going into his arms for the kiss that had become as natural as breathing. Tommy Henderson is reading at a level 2 years above his age, and Maria Running Deer solved a mathematics problem that stumped some of the older children. And their teacher? Their teacher, Sarah said, smiling up at the man who'd given her everything she'd never dared to dream of, is exactly where she belongs. As if summoned by her words, a small commotion from inside the schoolhouse made them both turn. Through the open door, they could see the children gathered around something, their voices excited but hushed. "What do you suppose?" Sarah began. But Bear was already moving toward the door. Inside, they found the students clustered around Sarah's desk, where a small wooden cradle sat gleaming in the afternoon light. It was a work of art, carved from honey-colored pine with intricate designs that spoke of hours of patient, loving work. "I finished it last night," Bear said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "Thought maybe it was time." Sarah stared at the cradle, her heart so full she could barely speak. They'd been talking about children, about the family they wanted to build together, but seeing this tangible symbol of their future made it suddenly, wonderfully real. "It's beautiful," she whispered, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "Perfect. Does this mean you're going to have a baby, Mrs. McKinnon?" asked Lucy Chen, the daughter of the Chinese family who'd settled in the valley the month before. Sarah looked at Bear, seeing her own hopes and dreams reflected in his gentle eyes. "Someday soon, I hope," she said. "Would you like that?" The chorus of excited voices that answered her question left no doubt these children, from a dozen different backgrounds and cultures, had become a family of sorts, and they were ready to welcome new members with open arms. That evening, as Sarah and Bear sat on their front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, the cradle resting between them like a promise, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Marrying a stranger, taking on all the complications that came with me?" Bear's laugh was warm and rich. "Regret marrying the most amazing woman in the territory? Regret finding love when I least expected it? Regret building a life that's better than anything I ever imagined?" He shook his head. "Never, Sarah. Not for a single moment. Even when 3 Apache sisters claimed you belonged to them?" "Especially then," Bear said, pulling her closer. "Because that's when I realized what I'd found with you was worth fighting for." Sarah settled against his warmth, listening to the evening sounds of their valley, the lowing of cattle, the call of night birds, the distant laughter of children playing in the settlement that had grown up around their school. It was a good sound, a sound of life and growth and community. "Bear? I love you. I love you too, Mrs. McKinnon. More than I ever thought possible." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sarah McKinnon, teacher, wife, and soon-to-be mother, smiled and closed her eyes, secure in the knowledge that sometimes the most unexpected journeys led to the most extraordinary destinations. And in the distance, barely audible on the evening wind, came the sound of Apache drums carrying news across the territory. News of a white woman who'd proven herself worthy, of a love that had conquered all obstacles, and of a future bright with promise for all who were brave enough to reach for it. The story of Bear and Sarah McKinnon had become legend, told around campfires and in trading posts throughout the Southwest, a tale of love found in the most unlikely circumstances, of courage tested and proven true, and of the power of 2 hearts united to build something lasting and beautiful in the wilderness. But for Sarah, curled against her husband's warmth as the New Mexico night settled around them, it wasn't a legend at all. It was simply home.